Some years ago, my grandmother and I used to watch vintage films together. The most memorable film I'd ever saw with her was the 1940s Charlie Chaplin classic, The Great Dictator. At the end of the film, there's a 3-minute speech given by Charlie Chaplin, who's dressed as Hitler. This monologue he delivers on tyranny and the human spirit is considered by many to be among the most powerful orations in cinematic history. There's one particular excerpt from this speech that captures its reputation. Take a listen.
Soldiers, don't give yourselves to brutes, men who despise you, enslave you, who regiment your lives, tell you what to do, what to think, and what to feel, who drill you, diet you, treat you like cattle, use you as cannon fodder. Don't give yourselves to these unnatural men with machine minds and machine hearts. You are not machines, you are not cattle, you are men. You have the love of humanity in your hearts.
When I first heard this dizzying splendor of language, I wanted to leap through the screen and join in this eloquence. It's elegant and beautifully balanced, and there's an arrangement to the words that feels grand. The speech was my first attempt to unpack what I learned were called rhetorical devices. Rhetorical devices are verbal mechanisms that allow you to bend and bang, twist and balance your words to produce beauty in your speech. The Greeks loved balance and beauty in speaking because it reflected the balance and beauty of one's thoughts. Those who could marshal beautiful sentences on command were believed to think greatly and were entrusted to act greatly. There are over 350 rhetorical devices used to sculpt sentences in artistic ways. In this lecture, I want to share the primary rhetorical devices that have the highest impact in speech and can be used in conversation without every utterance sounding like an epic pre-battle address. Those two devices we're going to learn are anaphora and alliteration. My intention is simply to expose you to a range of different verbal paintbrushes with the hope that you can choose one that you can begin painting your canvas with. Let's begin with anaphora. Anaphora is starting each sentence with the same words. It is the king of rhetorical figures. It is so preposterously easy to do. It is so preposterously easy to pick some words. It is so preposterously easy to repeat them. Everyone can do it. Everyone can start a sentence the same way. I could go on like this all day. Here's an example of anaphora used by Steve Jobs in his Stanford commencement address.
It means to try and tell your kids everything you thought you'd have the next 10 years to tell them in just a few months. It means to make sure everything is buttoned up so that it will be as easy as possible for your family. It means to say your goodbyes.
In this example, notice the repetition of the phrase, "it means." Steve echoes that expression at the forefront of 3 sentences. The effect is this subtle but beautifully hypnotic pulse in the sentence. Dun-dun, dun-dun, dun-dun. It's verbal scaffolding that becomes stronger the more it's reinforced. Here's another example. This time, try to identify where the anaphora is used.
They must remain standing because they are a monument to a moment in time when some men decided to turn the earth into a graveyard. Into it they shoveled all of their reason, their logic, their knowledge, but worst of all, their conscience. And the moment we forget this, the moment we cease to be haunted by its remembrance, then we become the gravediggers.
In that excerpt from Hollywood screenwriter Rod Serling, the anaphora is the phrase, "the moment." If you were paying attention, that phrase, "the moment," wasn't used to begin 2 sentences. It began 1 clause and then was used again to introduce a second clause. This is a completely valid use of anaphora. Anaphora can introduce multiple sentences just as it can introduce clauses in a single sentence. In fact, perhaps the most common way that anaphora is used in casual conversation is with the preposition to. To is often used as an elegant segue into consecutive thoughts instead of closing the sentence outright. For example, I was having a conversation with a friend last week, and at one point, I remember him saying, "Do you remember what it feels like to be 4, to see the world as one giant playground?" If we parse that sentence, you'll notice a very subtle occurrence of anaphora with the preposition to. My friend was expressing a thought, and instead of containing it within a single sentence, closing that sentence and then beginning anew. He used to elaborate on his first point with greater impact. Do you remember what it feels like to before? To see the world as one giant playground. Here's another example from the television writer Rod Serling with a classic case of anaphora using the preposition of.
Very often I find that within the framework of the science fiction or fantasy genre, the use of traveling back in time is a very effective way of producing contrasts, of producing a kind of a freewheeling storytelling device, which is why I used going back in time.
It's just enough of a sprinkle of anaphora to make the sentence feel melodious and eloquent. It's as if the anaphora is an echo buried in the sentence, da-da, 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 except the effect becomes stronger with each occurrence. Da, da, da. Like, people don't know why it sounds so delicious and articulate, but it does, and they listen. They listen for when you create patterns in your language. You create just a little order in this dizzying and swiftly changing world. And that's powerful. So how do you begin applying anaphora in your speaking? Let's talk about the application of anaphora. You don't prepare anaphora in advance, as you might when you're writing a speech. When anaphora is planned in advance, it sounds artificial and insincere. It's difficult because by the time you construct a sentence featuring anaphora, the window to use it has long passed. The challenge I had was to find a method for generating anaphora in the moment. And this is accomplished by extending your thought with anaphora using the words you just uttered. Think about extending your thought using anaphora so that you can develop the thought in more detail. Think about extending your thought with anaphora using the words you began it with. In this way, you're creating anaphora using the words that have already exited your mouth. For example, let's say you were telling a story about a time you took part in some adventurous activity. Let's say you were fishing. You begin by narrating the events of the story, and you happen to begin a question with, do I ask for help? Perhaps it's in reference to you struggling to reel in a fish. Do I ask for help? You decide that you want to add emphasis and emotional weight to this moment because it feels natural in the retelling of the story. So you continue leveraging the first few words of that question. Do I ask for help? Do I bury my ego and hand over the fishing rod? Do I risk losing my catch just to claim I caught the fish myself? You see how anaphora can be used to build upon natural speech. The effect is one of pausing the acceleration of the story and focusing in on a particular moment and emotion and insulating it with emphasis. My suggestion is when you speak, ask yourself, do I complete the sentence? Or have my opening words provided me an opportunity for anaphora? Once again, anaphora is repeating the same words at the beginning of consecutive sentences or clauses. The second rhetorical device is alliteration. Alliteration is the Rolls-Royce of rhetorical devices, and it's a rhetorical device that every powerful speaker has mastered. It gets the heads turning, the ears perking, the people exclaiming, wow, that was poetic. Alliteration is the repetition of any letter in two or more closely associated words. Let's listen to some examples.
To universalism, to reorganize and reorientate our cultural conversations. Authoritarian forces are abundant and abound.
When the deadly poisons produced by a nuclear exchange would be carried by wind and water and soil and seed,
we are confident in the sanity and sobriety of all leaders.
We groom and we graze together.
More modern life because of our disenfranchisement and disillusionment with religion that we don't have access to these ideas.
As you may have observed, alliteration generates rhythm in a sentence. Sanity and sobriety, groom and graze, wonderful and wonder-filled, catalog of crime. No one knows why we find pleasure in hearing words that begin with the same letter, but we do. It's the same enjoyment we take in hearing two notes vibrate with each other, like they dance with each other from a distance. And our brain recognizes this relationship and ascribes beauty and balance to those art forms that can mature disconnected components into one event or effect, and alliteration accomplishes this. Let's talk about the application of alliteration. How do we use alliteration in conversation? Similar to anaphora, alliteration is not a decision made in advance. I don't begin a sentence with the intent of using alliteration. I'm going to employ alliteration in this sentence. No. Alliteration is a device you weave into the fabric of your sentence because it feels natural. We happen to utter a word that starts with a P, like power, and it feels natural to roll that P into another word that also begins with P, like purpose, power and purpose. This is the first of two techniques for using alliteration. This is called letter anchoring. The anchor is the word that has a potential alliterative letter that you want to influence other words. For example, let's take this sentence. The weather was rainy to be expected, yet amazing. Now that sentence could function fine by itself, or I could single out that first adjective, rainy, and let that R continue to ring in my mind as I use it as a filter for finding a second adjective that also begins with an R and has similar meaning to amazing. Perhaps a word like refreshing. The weather was rainy to be expected, yet refreshing. Now, ideally, you would want the words closer together to accent that alliteration, but there's still a very subtle, elegant quality to the sentence. The more you make a deliberate effort to seed your sentences with alliteration, the easier it becomes to effortlessly yoke words together in beautiful ways. If you try this for a week, you'll quickly find yourself using alliteration without actively thinking about it. It's easily achievable. The second technique for using alliteration is to memorize word couplings. This method was made popular by Martin Luther King, who would commit to memory phrases that had alliteration baked into them.
The type of bitterness that can invade and infiltrate the life of the individual.
And it isn't that they are not people of goodwill. On the whole, they understand the depths and dimensions of the problem. Many of the mobs and the hoodlums are aided and abetted by some of the policemen.
Several other alliterative phrases from Martin Luther King include mighty mountains, bonds of brotherhood, content of character, jails and jaws of injustice, trials and tribulations, dark and desolate. The first word in these word couplings acts as a primer for introducing the rest of the phrase. When you're speaking aloud, all is required is an encounter with the priming word and the alliterative phrase is summoned. For instance, one of the word couplings I have memorized is questioning and questing, as in questioning and questing for answers. Whenever I use the word questioning, that full phrase fills my mouth. You don't have to conjure alliterative words out of thin air. You can have the combinations already determined. Martin Luther King would write these word couplings in his commonplace book and commit them to memory so they would be accessible to him in his interviews and media appearances. I log my word couplings inside of Nouns with an entire category dedicated to alliteration. A final note on alliteration before we proceed with the action item. Regardless of which method you use, you should be emphasizing the alliterative sounds. This is done by slightly punching up your voice on the alliterative letter. If I said, the weather was rainy and refreshing, the alliteration is unnoticed, like a whisper in a whirlwind. The weather was rainy and refreshing does a better job of singing that magical alliterative quality. Notice how Carl Sagan does this.
The sanity and sobriety of all leaders.
Sanity and sobriety. Lean into the alliterative letter. Once again, alliteration is using words that begins with the same sound. It helps a phrase stick in the mind. It helps a phrase sound more musical and memorable. The action item for today's lecture is to review the Rhetorical Devices worksheet. As we will discuss in a future lecture, we do not rise to great levels of articulation organically. We fall to the level of our average language input. The content we read, see, hear is what we say. Below this video, there's a resource with an abundance of examples of anaphora and alliteration. Read through this list aloud, record yourself using any voice notes app, and play back the audio. I understand you may be uneasy hearing your own voice. It's natural. I would encourage you to feel a tremendous sense of accomplishment of listening to yourself. Most people don't possess the nerve to listen to themselves speak. Embrace the discomfort. You only have to play through the audio once. We have to understand that just as our poor speech habits are shaped by what we absorb through our senses, the good speech habits that we desire for ourselves are learned the same way. Our eloquence is paved with the sound of our own voice.